I think you need to remember that in 1942, World War II was a very busy situation, not just in the UK, but all over the world. So many things were happening simultaneously, and the British were so worried about Germany and the problems they had locally in Europe that something that happened so far away from their perspective in Hong Kong and the seas off China was a distant tragedy and just one thing in a whole list of issues that were occurring at the same time.
Well, Tony, I can't imagine what a massive job it was for you to collect all those information, especially a piece of history that has been forgotten for such a long time. So during your research, what struck you the most?
What shocked me the most, I think, bit by bit became the scale. When you say 1,816 men were on the ship, it's just a number. But when you start working through them name by name by name by name, and you research into their families, their parents, their brothers, sisters, and for the older ones, wives and children, the scale of the tragedy just becomes enormous and really quite intimidating. It was no small thing. By the context of World War II, obviously there were bigger tragedies, bigger events, bigger battles. But you're talking here about something bigger than the Titanic. And yet, in that context, of course, it was considered to be just another disaster.
Dr. Banham, besides the tragedy itself, the film, and of course your book also distributed a significant portion to the connections between the Chinese fishermen and those POWs back then, after they were rescued. To be honest, back then they didn't even speak the same language. What connected them together?
The catalyst was when 2 or 3 of the British guys on board managed to swim to the islands by themselves. And they were old China hands, as we say. They spoke some Chinese, some dialect, I've forgotten which one, but they could make themselves understood. And when these 2 or 3 British guys explained to the Chinese fishermen that the people they were watching drowning were British, everything changed. And despite the fact that the Japanese were literally shooting at the water, shooting at the POWs, shooting at the Chinese people, the fishermen still took their little boats into the water amongst the floating bodies and started pulling people out. And if they hadn't done that, if they hadn't made that connection, that these were allies that needed to be rescued, we would have seen hundreds more deaths.
Right, and Tony, people are grateful, as we just heard, that this piece of history can be restored and be shown to the public, both by your book and the film. But what do you personally want to have from your audience or readers?
Well, it's interesting. I worked with Fang Li quite closely, obviously, in the production of this. And several times we spoke together after the premiere in Shanghai and in Beijing and in London in 2023. And in different routes, we had both come to the same conclusion, that although this is a story about an event during World War II, and although the focus is a ship called the Lisbon Maru on those on board, that's not really the story. We both came to the conclusion that the story is about individual people and the families they came from and the impact that war has on families. It doesn't matter if you're British or Chinese or whatever. The nationality is not the important thing. The important thing is that when war comes, everybody is a victim. And we need to remember primarily that war has such a terrible impact on ordinary families.
So, since you mentioned that, Dr. Banham, let me refer you to a quote we've got from the premiere in London. He said, "It's important to remember such factual human stories in a chaotic world." What's your understanding of this?
I totally agree. The world, everything goes through phases. There's always a cycle. And the world has gone through many cycles, even during my lifetime. And I think we are at a chaotic point at the moment in terms of international relations, the news you see every morning on the TV. And perhaps it's a good time to remind people yet again that politicians can do their job, but as ordinary people, irrespective of nationality, let's just focus on the common humanity. We're all people, we all have families, we all have very much the same needs and desires. That should be the focus and not chaos.
Do you think that is the essential or the central value you want to send out from your book, to especially to a present world which is becoming chaotic again, is in war again?
Yes, I think so. I think the key message from the book and the film is one of humanity. It's simply that families are families, people are people, and we should simply recognize that wars, and not just wars, but bad international relationships don't do anybody any good. Harmony is what works, and harmony should be the focus.